Thank you very much. Members of the press, Minister Anand, it's wonderful to be back in Halifax, Nova Scotia for the 14th annual Halifax International Security Forum. I'm delighted to be here. We have a very important agenda this weekend. It will be no surprise that we will be focusing heavily on issues related to Ukraine, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and the consequences which really are being felt worldwide. Joining us this weekend, in addition to Minister Anand, is Canada's Chief of Defence Staff. We have a very strong congressional delegation from the United States, and we're delighted that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is here to speak at the forum tomorrow, Saturday, and also to meet with Minister Anand. Overall, we have over 300 people. More than 24 people have traveled from Ukraine to be with us this weekend, and we are looking forward to making sure that their stories will be told and heard by decision makers in Canada, the United States, and around the world as everybody prepares and looks at policy options moving forward with regard to Ukraine. So I'm delighted to be here, and Minister Anand, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. I acknowledge that we are on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people and reaffirm our commitment to meaningful reconciliation and partnership with Indigenous peoples. And my goodness, it is just great to be back at home in Nova Scotia, where I was born and raised, as we co-host the Halifax International Security Forum. C'est une occasion pour notre pays de démontrer ce que nous faisons le mieux sur la scène internationale, rassembler les nations, favoriser la collaboration et aider à trouver des solutions. Canada has played this role throughout our history. As Minister of National Defence, I know how important this kind of leadership is, especially in today's global security environment. And my friends, our world is only growing darker. Putin's full-scale and unjustifiable attack on Ukraine is a stark reminder of how fragile peace and stability can be. Et c'est un rappel du devoir des démocraties libérales de maintenir et de protéger l'ordre international fondé sur des règles qui protègent la sécurité mondiale depuis des décennies. Vladimir Putin's reckless and dangerous war of choice is just one of the threats facing the international community today. China is being increasingly aggressive in its desire to assert its ambitions in the Indo-Pacific. Non-state actors are growing bolder in their attempts to cause division and disruption as well through cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and more. Emerging technology like AI and robotics are rapidly evolving and changing the domains of warfare. Et le changement climatique aussi continue de faire des ravages au pays et à l'étranger. And these are just some of the factors that threaten to undermine the progress and prosperity and freedom that liberal democracies have worked so hard to achieve. I announced earlier today that Canada has proposed Halifax to be the host of Diana, a groundbreaking NATO initiative which would see the city become a hub for research, for innovation, and defense industry collaboration. And over the next 3 days, top military, political, industry leaders from around the world will explore how we can work together to meet today's security challenges as well as tomorrow's. And Peter, I want to thank you for your leadership in making sure that we do convene year after year to discuss the most important security threats to our world. Soyons clairs, ces défis sont très complexes et souvent ils sont connectés. And that is why the frank multilateral and bilateral discussions that we will have this weekend are so important and so timely. I know how much work goes into planning and pulling off a conference like this seamlessly, having spent most of my professional life in academia organizing conferences similar in tone to this one, Peter. Et ça, c'est l'expertise que vous avez, votre équipe aussi, et l'expérience aussi. Et merci beaucoup encore une fois. Resolve. And Canada is deeply committed as an international partner, a leader, and a steadfast defender of democracy and freedom and the rules-based international order. And I am so eager and so excited to spend this weekend engaging with our allies, with our partners, and with our friends. Thank you very, very much, and I'm so happy to be able to take your questions and to be here with you this weekend. Merci beaucoup. Je peux répondre à vos questions maintenant.
Thank you very much. Sorry, can we just fix the mic in the... Okay, we'll now take questions from journalists in the room. Please state your name and outlet. On va prendre une question, une sous-question, and please indicate who your question is for. We'll start with Murray.
Good afternoon, Minister Anand. It's been almost 5 months since the NATO summit and the announcement that Canada would lead a brigade in Latvia. You've been having discussions with allies. Can you give any indication now about the size and composition of that brigade and whether or not you have firm commitments from Canada's partners to step up?
You're exactly right. At the Madrid summit in June, Canada committed to increasing the size of our commitment in Latvia, where we lead the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group to brigade level. And we have, since that time, been engaging in a very serious way with our partners around the table, including the member states of the battle group that we lead in Latvia. In particular, General Air was in Latvia in September having that conversation with the other chiefs of defense staff of the member countries of the battle group, and I can confirm that we will be committing additional troops to that endeavor in Latvia as we move to brigade level. And the precise number of troops, of course, will depend on the other complementary contributions that the other member countries will be making. And of course, it's not just human resources that we are discussing. We are also making sure that the capabilities exist so that once the personnel is increased, they have items to train on. They have sufficient resources and equipment to support the battle group and the training exercises there. And finally, we are also engaging with the government of Latvia. Why? Because infrastructure is of the utmost importance. We need to be able to house the additional troops that we will be sending across the member countries into Latvia as we move to brigade level. So, Murray, to answer your question, we are continuing to ensure that we are meeting the personnel, the equipment, and the infrastructure needs that moving to brigade level will occasion.
My follow-up question is a little bit more domestic in the sense that the Auditor General this week put out a report on Arctic surveillance, and in that report it says that the satellite system that keeps Canada safe in the Arctic, the Constellation 2 and the other satellite systems there, will be running out of their useful life by 2026. No plans to, firm plans to get a replacement up there. The Canadian Armed Forces has its own plan to put satellites up there by 2025 or 2035. You committed in June to enhanced NORAD commitments, and how is it that you're going to be able to keep an eye on the Arctic with an aging satellite system and a satellite system that is non-existent?
Okay, Murray, that question, multifaceted as it is, requires a multifaceted answer. First and foremost, $40 billion on the table to ensure that we are not only maintaining the North Warning System, as we are doing with a $600 million contract to Nasatuk Corporation, but we're also building a new surveillance system called the Northern Approaches Surveillance System, which will push our aerospace surveillance further and further north, being able to detect cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, etc. And so we will continue to roll out the steps of NORAD modernization and continental defense. And part of that is going to also include over-the-horizon radar systems. And in particular, we are working with our NORAD allies, in the United States in particular, to make sure that we are accelerating the timeline for that as quickly as possible. And so as we roll that out and the planning continues, we will provide further updates. But suffice it to say, we have the current North Warning System that we are maintaining, as well as constructing the Northern Approaches Surveillance System, including an over-the-horizon radar system. So that's the first point. The second point you were raising is on the PBO report relating to Arctic sovereignty. Of course, NORAD modernization speaks to aerospace security in that region, but we know that there are other areas of northern and Arctic security that we want to ensure are protected, and in particular, we need to be thinking about our Arctic waters. And in that respect, we are ensuring that the Arctic offshore patrol ships continue to be built. We have 3 of those in the water, 3 to come, and one of those Arctic offshore patrol ships has circumnavigated the North American continent. In terms of future procurements, we are also continuing to plan with the Canadian Surface Combatants, and those will also add additional marine technologies and abilities to our fleet and the protection of our Arctic. And then finally, let's remember the aerospace situation, as well as the F-35s. And we are in the final stages of contracting for 88 future fighters, and I hope to have more to say on the finalization of that contracting process in the near future. Thank you.
Minister, with respect, I asked about satellites and satellite coverage.
We are continuing to ensure that the $40 billion that is part of NORAD modernization includes all aspects of surveillance and Arctic defense, including satellites.
Justin?
Yes, sir. Justin Ling, freelance. I want to ask you about providing more technology to Ukraine. We just heard former President Petro Poroshenko speak a couple minutes ago about the need for more anti-air, more anti-missile, more anti-drone technology, particularly with the damage done this week to Ukraine's energy system. Is there more Canada can do? Is there more NATO can do to upgrade Ukraine's air defensive systems?
So Canada operates as one of 30 countries of the NATO alliance, and when the Defence Contact Group of more than 50 countries gets together, we put up a slide and essentially go around the table to ensure that each country is leveraging its own expertise and its own inventory to put on the table whatever it is that Ukraine needs, and in keeping with what we have in our inventory and what we can procure from industry. At the current time, Canada doesn't have the items you mentioned in your question, but what we do have is, as you have seen in our donations to date, expertise in industry that meets the needs of Ukraine, and in particular the asks of Minister Resnikov of me, and I have frequent conversations with him about these items. So the over 70 cameras for drones that we have provided to Ukraine in very short order are a specific ask of Minister Resnikov. The 500,000 pieces of winter clothing, again, a specific ask of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The armored vehicles, 39 from GDLS and another 8 from Rochelle, those are also specific asks from Ukraine. The M777s and the ammunition for the M777s, in particular the 155 millimeter ammunition, again, a specific ask. So what I'm trying to suggest to you is we are giving whatever we can, and that's why you've seen now an over $1 billion monetary commitment for military aid and equipment for Ukraine from the Government of Canada.
I'm going to give you a really quick double-barrel question here. One is Ukraine is fundraising for what's called an anti-Shahid drone interception system. Is Canada considering providing funding for that? Is that something Canada can provide help with? Secondly, President Zelensky has said the most effective way to shoot down those missiles is through the air. They've re-upped that request for those MiG-29s from Poland. Has Canada changed its position on that? Do you envision NATO changing its position on sending those planes?
So on both of those items, I will say that we are continuing to have the conversation with the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine as well as our NATO allies to make sure that we are doing whatever we can from either a monetary or a tangible equipment perspective to support Ukraine in its time of need. But as I said earlier, my focus really is on engaging Canadian industry to step up as quickly as possible to provide the aid that Ukraine is asking for and that Canada can directly provide. That's what I have direct efficacy with, and that is what we have been effective on providing. I'll just say, Justin, that we have had $500 million put on the table for the Ministry of Defense and me to spend in budget 2022. We spent that money in about 3 months. We just received another $500 million, and I expect that we will continue to walk the road of ensuring that Ukraine has equipment in the military space as quickly as possible from the Government of Canada, and that's what I'm working on every day. Thank you.
Hi, Minister. Just to pick up on what you were talking about there with military aid and NATO, obviously there was a significant discussion over the past week about the possibility of Article 5 being invoked. Even without intent, the Russians don't have the best history with aim. They're using missiles in ways they were not intended for. They've hit Moldova before. There's a very real possibility that they do hit a NATO country. What kind of conversations are you having with your colleagues about what happens in that event, which seems increasingly inevitable, even if it's not deliberate?
So as soon as those 2 missiles hit Poland, I was in touch with my counterpart, Mariusz Błaszczak, in Poland, and I have continued to offer support for that investigation going forward. Stepping back from that particular issue, as you have in your question, I will say that at all times, NATO allies are cognizant of the import of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, that an attack against one is an attack against all, as well as Article 4 of that treaty. But by the same token, my approach in those conversations that you referenced is to be prudent, is to be cautious. We are at an inflection point in the global strategic environment, and I want to make sure that we have full information before we advocate particular positions around the table. And so I am a rational decision maker, and that's what we are waiting for in terms of the information coming out of Poland, but also in terms of decisions, very weighty decisions relating to the global strategic environment.
I know you have a close relationship with President Biden and his administration, but with the Republican situation in the House and some very vocal Republicans who are talking about walking back aid on Ukraine, for example, the howitzer shells were coming from the United States. How concerned are you about a changing situation that possibly affecting Canada's ability to provide aid to Ukraine?
In my conversations with Secretary Austin, I am hearing a very strong bilateral support for Ukraine. When Secretary Blinken was in Canada, he reiterated this position. And we have a co-delegation coming to HISF today. I will be meeting with them, which again represents a bipartisan support for the main topic here today, which is ensuring NATO solidarity and solidarity across stakeholders and partners for the solidarity and sovereignty of Ukraine, not to mention the stability of the rules-based international order. So the bottom line to your question is I expect that bipartisan support to continue all conversations that I have had have pointed in that direction. Peter, I'm not sure if you have anything else you want to add to that?
Thank you, Minister, and it's nice to talk. But I have to tell you, I've stood here with a few ministers over the years, and I just want to say to everybody that Canada is very lucky to have this Minister of National Defence. We do have a bipartisan group coming. You'll hear from Senator Risch and Representative Michael McCall. Representative McCall, I would urge all of you to pay close attention to that. That's tomorrow afternoon. Senator Risch is the Republican ranking member in the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and Representative McCall will now be the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which is very influential, and he will have an opportunity to give his point of view, which is influential, and as the minister suggested, it seems to me that there's going to be continued bipartisan support for supporting Ukraine from the United States.
Thanks. Brett?
Thank you. Peter, I'm going to make you talk again. But my follow-up will be the same question to you, Minister, as well. Once we hit Sunday, we're Friday now, and we arrive at Sunday, what will be a marker of success for this year's Security Forum? An announcement or a collaboration? What will be a success in your mind? And then, Minister, in yours.
Well, I very much appreciate the question, and I will just say this about that. What we do, I won't speak for the minister, but what we do at Halifax International Security Forum, HFX, is not a science. It is an art. And bringing everybody together under one roof here with Nova Scotia hospitality in and of itself is an accomplishment. Why? Because ministers, legislators, experts are having the opportunity to interact and learn from each other. Specifically this year, we made a special effort to bring Ukrainians from Ukraine so that they would be able to tell their story. This is not something that is happening in the abstract. This is something that is happening to real people right now who are suffering. This hotel, the Westin Nova Scotian Hotel here in downtown Halifax, has 13 Ukrainian refugees that have arrived to Canada that are now working here at the hotel. So that's number one, is that being here together is an accomplishment in and of itself. But as the minister suggested, what is very important at this time is maintaining unity through the winter. The winter is going to be cold. It's going to be tough. I think for Canadians, we have to remember that in Europe, it's going to be, energy is going to be far more expensive. And just keeping in mind that nobody is going to suffer this winter more than the Ukrainians, and that Canadians, Americans, Europeans, everybody, I think, is very, very proud to be supporting Ukraine's effort against what really is a barbaric attack from the Russians.
Some of the most important things in life are not tangible. And so it is with the Halifax International Security Forum and academic conferences that I knew as a professor at the University of Toronto, and as Professor Stein knows. The ability for allies and academics and industry and non-governmental organizations to come together to exchange ideas, shore up support for an undeniably important moral cause cannot go unnoticed. And so I would say a successful conference is for us to continue to engage with each other, to foster the dialogue that the Halifax International Security Forum does so well, and to ensure that when we leave on Sunday, we know that we are united in our support and our advocacy for the rules-based international order and for the sovereignty of a country that was unjustifiably and illegally invaded on February 24th, 2022, not to mention the Russian invasion of Crimea in 2014. We must go on, and the Halifax International Security Forum allows us to continue to go on together.
And we'll go to Voice of America for a final question and follow-up.
Thank you so much. I'm Mehdi Agha-Zamani from Voice of America Persian service with more than 50 million audience in Iran. As you know, Madam Minister, Iranian regime assists Russia with the weapon and drone in the Ukraine war, and Canadian government banned the high-level official Iranian leaders and include 10,000 members of the IRGC. And in the other side, brave Iranian people right now uprising in the street for freedom. What's the official statement of the Canadian government to Iranian regime, and what's your personal message as a woman in the power, a woman in the leadership for Iranian brave people, specifically Iranian women?
Well, as you know, the Canadian government has, over the past number of weeks, imposed sanctions and other items against the Iranian regime as a message of disagreement and condemnation of the treatment of women in that country. And as a woman myself, a racialized woman, that is simply trying to do my best for the Canadian public, I will say that I stand with all Iranian women who are seeking to do the same and beyond. Their fight is our fight.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's press conference. Merci tout le monde. Bon après-midi.